I think we'll go ahead and get started. It seems like we have the majority of folks. So it looks like we have a 1 minute countdown, maybe. Not sure. That looks like an hour countdown.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll stop that. That was for my own purpose. We don't need that.
Okay. Antonia, you want to start the recording?
I did, yes.
Okay. Great. Welcome to our second orientation session for Leading Adaptive Change in Public Health. My name is Laurie Call, and I'm joined by my colleague Antonia Lalagos. We're providing technical support, and NACCHO will be once again delivering the training. And I would just want to remind you that this course is offered through the Illinois Public Health Association Workforce Development Committee and funded by the County Health Rankings and Roadmaps, Region 5 Public Health Training Center, and the Illinois Association of Public Health Administrators. Thank you. I just had a blank there. Okay, so I'm going to quickly turn things over to Dea and Talia to get us started. And if for some reason you missed the initial session that we had on earlier this week on Tuesday, that has been recorded and uploaded, and you should be able to view that. So I will turn things over to Dea.
Great. So just the housekeeping items, I think we went through those the other day, so we don't really need to go through that. So before we get started, this is going to be a content webinar where we really talk through the process of how to do peer advising session within the context of the adaptive leadership framework. So we're going to, I just want to, have you look at this picture and tell me what you observe, because we're really going to be breaking down what it means to observe something. So please just use the chat function to jot down some of your observations about this picture.
Just as a reminder, find the chat function. You and can click on the arrow that will expand the menu, and then you'll see a box or a tab that says chat, and you can type in that. You can also detach that by holding down on the chat bar and pulling it out.
Okay. So I've seen some observations come in. Thank you for that. A bored or tired child, possibly not motivated by playing his instrument. A boy contemplating to practice his instrument. Studying the violin. A young boy looking at the violin. Maybe he's falling asleep or just not excited. One or more of several emotions: sadness, boredom, frustration. So this is really fascinating. What we have just done pretty much is explain what we're going to do today. So what I would categorize most of the observations that you all chatted in is exactly our natural inclination is to take a piece of information and infuse it with our own understanding of the world, our own experiences, emotions, learning, knowledge, and then make interpretations about that picture. So I would venture to say that 90% of what's coming in across here, and please feel free to scroll through the chat function and see what I mean, it's really about you're making interpretation. So part of the process that we're going to do today is really slow us down into the observation phase and spend some time in the observation phase. So I'm going to flip through. Thank you for hearing me on that. I appreciate those comments coming in. So for our agenda today, we're going to do an overview of the peer advising framework. We're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of peer advising for both the peer advisors and for the presenter. We're going to talk about the observation, interpretation, and intervention, which is the theoretical framework that we use for peer advising. We're going to do a little mock peer advising session just to get these practices a little bit more familiar and comfortable to you, and then I'm going to give you a set of best practices that you want to follow as you go through learning and participating in the peer advising. So peer advising overview, there's 4 sessions total that happen every second Tuesday, every second week on Tuesdays. On that day, there's 2 times that you can join a peer advising, so that accommodates the full group. That there's we allow for 16 people for each of the time slots, and that covers the whole 30-person group. The format is going to be a conference call, so we won't be using the webinar, and the topic will be a leadership challenge. So as I talked about briefly yesterday, 16 people will be chosen throughout the course to present their leadership challenge, and the others of us will act as peer advisors. The guidance that we'll need for this and that you'll have for this is the peer advising protocol, which should be attached in the materials here, and we also have it in the peer advising module. It looks like most of you have gotten into the learning management system on NACCHO and are able to get into the material. So if you go in, you'll see the peer advising protocol, the best practices, and you'll also have Talia and I on the call as your coaches. And Talia and I will have a number of roles. We're really going to be coaching you to stick to the protocol. We're going to be doing the timing for you, so we have that out of the way. And we'll be helping you to do some self-reflection. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits of why we do this. So the benefits of peer advising, especially when you are a person who works in a smaller organization or even a person who works in a larger organization but is so entrenched in your challenges or your daily work that you don't have the ability to step back and get that perspective that comes with being a few feet away from the challenge itself. So when the case presenter talks about their adaptive challenge, it really provides them a safe space to share about this leadership challenge that might not be safe in your own workplace to talk about the difficulties that you're having, whether it be personality challenges or just challenges getting the movement you need to do to initiate and sustain change. And you also really get access to diverse perspectives that are from outside of your own system. So we use the word conflictual, and that word's going to come up a lot. And what I mean by conflictual is that so often we're set up in discussions that if someone says something in a meeting, we usually kind of go along with that and don't directly disagree with them. So we don't usually reward a culture of conflict. We reward a culture of peacemaking. And adaptive leadership really views this differently, that when you offer up conflictual pieces of information about someone's case, it's wonderful, because John might have one opinion, Mary might have another interpretation or opinion, and it really takes that complex group of people and allows you to get a lot of different perspectives. And it also is really with the goal of having you identify a series of intervention tests you can to better diagnose exactly what your adaptive challenge is and how you can begin to work on it. With the peer advisors, we have evaluated this course every time that we've done it and really explored what was the benefits for peer advisors on this. And they really have said that they gain an appreciation of the observation, interpretation, and intervention framework and how it has utility in solving problems, because it slows down our natural processes that we want to leap straight from receiving information straight into the solution. And it's an opportunity to help them to better understand the leadership challenge. You are really helping another peer to better understand what they're facing, and that oftentimes gives you insight on the personal challenge that you're facing, because each of you is going to bring one personal leadership challenge to the course, but I'm sure that you're facing multiple challenges. So it can give you insight on some of your other personal challenges. So let's go back to this picture, and I want to talk about what an observation is. An observation is anything that you can see with your 5 senses and that we would all agree upon. It does not have the influence of culture. It does not have the influence of time. It does not have the influence of values. An example of that might be that everyone said this was a boy, and I think that they said it was a boy because of the short haircut. So that's a value judgment that we're putting on there. So that's making an interpretation. What is crucial about observations is that they are something that we could all sit around the table and agree that we are seeing the same thing. So I want to do this exercise again, and I want you to really chat in what are some observations that you see here. And I'm just gonna, this is meant to be interactive, and the whole webinar is gonna be going through this format. So we'll be using this same format in the live learning to use the chat function to discuss. So violin contemplation. Now contemplation is a value-laden word. That is an emotion that he's feeling. And I would, I might offer up a conflictual interpretation and say that he's just sleepy. Or maybe he just lost his grandfather and this was his grandfather's violin and he's really sad looking at it. So emotions are not, those are interpretations. When we begin to assign emotional intent to someone else, we really are moving into the realm of interpretation. So the observation might be, there is a small person looking down at a violin. I observe a child staring at their violin. I would challenge even that and say you don't know that it's their violin. That's assigning, again, a value to it. You're making an assumption about that. So really, I love this one by Christy. A child with short hair sitting with eyes partially covered by eyelids seemed to be looking at violin. That is a very great observation. The child is missing the bow for the violin. Another great observation. I think we could all agree upon that. See, a young person looking at an instrument, looking at the violin on top of an open book. Yeah, so I think you're beginning to get it. It's this idea that we don't, much of what we do is receive stimulus and immediately assign our own experience, our own judgment, and filter it through all of the screens that we've developed in the course of our lives, and then we make an instant interpretation and move to action based on that. So this is just a picture of a boy with a violin, but imagine this in a much more serious case if this were a CEO of a company and he noticed that turnover rates were getting into the 45% churn rates and was really uncomfortable with that. That CEO might make one observation: okay, pay rates are not equal to others in the field and we're going to raise pay rates. CEO implements a major change based on an observation, one interpretation, and then finds after that has gone through that employees are still leaving at the same rates. So that is that's a challenge that comes out of going with your first interpretation and really not thinking through what the potential other interpretations could be. Because another interpretation of employees leaving at a quick rate is that they don't feel valued for their work. They don't have the space that they enjoy working in. There's an environment of tension or secrecy. There's all sorts of things. So he might take a much better tact by going in and really doing some more investigation about what the issue is before making a really high impact, high risk change. I hope that's resonating a little bit with you all. So here's another picture. Let's just do this again real quick because I really want to get clear on the observations and then we'll do interpretation. So let's just, rapid fire, do some observations here. Make them as based on your 5 senses, as much as we can, really focus in on things that we would all agree on. So just chat in what your observations are here. Okay, great. Person on a bed. Person in a long outfit reaching for the door. Another person laying in bed. 2 people. 1 person standing in the doorway covering their face. A man laying on the bed. A woman standing with her covering her face. So as you see, when we begin to think about observations, they really begin to align with each other. So a lot of times in diagnosing adaptive challenge, you need to come to the very first place you need to come to is an understanding that you're observing the same things. So let's take this and start to really make some observations or some interpretations based off of your observations. So the way that we structure an interpretation in this format is that we would say, I would take maybe Samantha's, a person covering face with hand with other hand on doorknob in the other room, a person laying on the bed. So I'll say, I observed that. Based on that, I think with a woman covering her face, it indicates that she is sad. I also observed that there is a bottle in the person on the bed, the hand, which may indicate that he has drunk too much. So let's start doing some interpretations, but please try to link them back to your observations. You're always going to want to use that, I observe X, and based on that, I interpret Y. And I understand, and I know that this can be, this is a really different process, and it can be quite clunky and uncomfortable as we go through it, which is why I try to really do it in this more simplistic format. So just start to jot in some of your interpretations, including what your observation was. I observe a woman holding her face, which leads me to believe she may be sad or upset. Absolutely. So it's your interpretation. And what is great about that, Brandy, is the first part of it, the observation you can probably agree upon, but if you were sitting there with another staff member, that person might say that this person is experiencing grief because the person on the bed looks like they're dead, or this person is experiencing, is laughing because yet again they see, the person on the bed passed out again. So an observation, the man is dead and the woman is crying. That's a great interpretation. Interpret that she is not happy and pleased. These are great, everybody. Interpret this to mean that they are passed out. Covering hand, so she may be sad or ashamed. The man in the bed is asleep or unconscious. These are great. And so as we go through this process of learning the peer advising protocol, a lot of the time is back-ended into doing observation and interpretation, and very little time is spent on what we're used to doing is taking action. So I know that most of you have probably had a supervisor or a boss that has said to me, said to you, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a solution. And so I think that we live in a culture where quickly solving problems has become the way that we feel successful. And what we need to understand is that the way that we see the problem is often what the problem is. And by gathering multiple perspectives from your stakeholders, from other people that touch the challenge that you're working on, you really begin to understand and see a more dynamic picture of what the whole of what's going on. And then collectively, you can begin to make interpretations on what those observations might mean. And when you get to that interpretation stage, you really want to stay in there for long enough that you are able to not just rush with the first course of action, but really put out some ideas of what potentially might be happening. So this framework is called Observation, Interpret, Intervene, and it's often labeled as OII. I try not to use acronyms, but I sometimes slip, but I will always try to say Observe, Interpret, Intervene rather than OII for you. So the process starts with observation, and again, those are anything that is collected from your five senses, anything that you think that we could all agree upon, either from what we see, what we hear, what we taste, smell, all of those things come into play. So, body language is often something that is interpreted really quickly instead of observed. And many people have the notion that certain ways of sitting interprets as certain types of behavior. But you really want to think about observing just like what is happening and then moving into the interpretation of why that is happening or what hypothesis is about the observation that you're making. So once you have generated multiple hypotheses or interpretations about your observations, you can then begin to design short, small interventions or tests for those. When you test, what you're really testing is to see if you have a better understanding of the problem. So with adaptive leadership in the change management framework and vein, where I see it to be really helpful is in the diagnostic phase of change management, in really beginning to get a clearer picture of what the challenges you're facing, to try small interventions and tests based on these multiple interpretations, and then to take the information from that in a feedback loop and go back and make more observations. So some tips for peer advising. Observation, our tendency when we have the protocol, I'm going to show you the protocol in just a minute, it's not problem solving. It really steers away from that. Observation, questions that are observational questions do not start like this. One time, I also faced the same thing that you were facing, and I did this. Have you tried that? That's a question, but it is a problem-solving question. It is not in the true spirit of inquiry and in the true spirit of curiosity. So observation is really about trying to gather as much information. So who are the major players? How does this affect other people? Can you tell me what success looks like for you? What have you done so far for your challenge? Those are all real questions that really gather information that allow you to make those observations. And then with interpretations, I mentioned this briefly, you want to generate multiple interpretations. So your groups, your peer advising groups will have one coach, either Talia or myself, and then there'll be 8 of your peers. 1 will be presenting and 7 of you will be peer advisors. That's if everybody signs up for every section. So we may have smaller groups than that. With all those people, I want to hear multiple interpretations. Everyone on this call has different life experience and different work experience, and I think it's really important to make multiple levels of interpretation. So there's a difference between a benign interpretation and a conflictual interpretation. Conflictual can be interpreted in 2 ways. One is that it's just simply a different opinion than what someone else has already stated. It also means that it might actually be a provocative statement or provocative interpretation that allows the person who is presenting their case to get a deeper or different understanding that may make them uncomfortable. I invite you to embrace being in an uncomfortable space. We learn much better there. These sessions are boundaried by safety. They're not recorded. It'll just be the 8 or 9 of us live on the call together. And really, the conflictual and challenging interpretations that you make about your fellow peers' case are going to be very helpful to them. The benign tends to be something that the participant or the peer presenter already knows. Or is kind to them in some way. We talk about, it speaks to their altruistic values and it is not going to bother them. So we really want to make sure that we're properly getting a range of interpretations from benign to conflictual. And then when we get to the intervention phase, we're really seeking quantity over quality. So I know that sounds opposite to what you really hear, but if you think about this process, we are going to collect observations and you'll have, a page of notes of just observations. Then we're going to hopefully generate 30 or 40 different interpretations and then quickly go in and try to make as many interventions as we can. If we spend too much time on one intervention, we might be like that CEO that invested all of their time and energy in raising the salaries before properly investigating what was at the root of their employees leaving. So we are seeking the quantity over the quality because we really want to, some of us, we might be really off base, but if we get a lot of different interventions out there, you're going to really be able to have choices for the peer presenter. That case presenter will have lots of choices of different interventions. And the interventions also range on a spectrum. They're from low to high risk, and we want to offer a broad range of low to high risk. We want something low risk, like go home and do a time analysis and see how much of your time is actually spent on this challenge that you're working on, and where are you spending the most time. Very low risk, personal, done at your desk, doesn't have to be shared with anyone. High risk, implement a 360 evaluation across the board for all of your employees on your team. Very high risk. It might be, it might be something that the person would not ever do. High risk, meeting with a high level individual to ask why they are only in name only supporting a quality improvement initiative, but aren't there when the chips fall and the work really needs to be done. So we want to have a range from low to high risk. So how's this sounding to folks? Is this a different format than you usually use in meetings, probably? And how is it settling in with you? Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide because I want us to have time to do our case study. So right here is the peer advising protocol. You all should have access to this, and you should have this printed out and in your hand every single time you do a peer advising session. You'll see that the first two sections are classified under observation. For 5 minutes, the case presenter gets to present their case, and they get to talk without having anybody else speak for 5 full minutes about their case. The second part is the diagnostic questioning. Now, that's 10 minutes where the peer advisors, all of the peers that are listening, that just listened to the case, have that opportunity to gather more information about the case so that they can make the later interpretations. And there's about 10 minutes to do that. There are suggestions for questions here, and if you find yourself not able to come up with questions, I really highly recommend that you at least use some of these that are on the board. Then we move into the interpretation phase. So again, these are hour-long phone calls. We move into the interpretation phase, which is the diagnostic brainstorming. And that's when, as a group, without the peer presenter, so the peer presenter is silent during the next 3 sections. So the peer presenter does not say anything during diagnostic brainstorming. What we are doing as peer advisors and coaches are essentially having a conversation about what this person presented behind their back. When we do this in live, real-time sessions, we actually ask the presenter to turn their back. We sit in a small circle and we ask the presenter, after they've presented their case and asked to answer the diagnostic questions, we ask them to turn their back to the group, and then the group kind of faces in at each other and begins to generate these multiple interpretations. So we're shortening this down to 10 minutes. It's usually 15 minutes. I note that because I want you to notice that we're already 30 minutes into an hour-long conversation, and we haven't said one thing about solving the challenge or action steps that they can take, which is very, very unusual, right? It's not how our time is usually structured at work. So after we do the interpretation phase, we go into action step brainstorming, and we'll spend 5 minutes there. And again, this is just a time where the presenter is not saying anything, and the coach, Talia and myself, will be helping you to make some interpretations, some interventions that you think are in the service of this person's learning. And the best way to frame this is, I observed X, I interpret Y, and I suggest Z intervention to test out the validity of that interpretation. So you really want to, when you're in this intervention phase and action step brainstorming, you really want to be still tracking back through an interpretation and an observation. It's really helpful. I usually take about 2 pages of notes during this, and I'm in a very quiet space, so I suggest you do the same. And then the next session, forward. Now I'm too good at forwarding the slides. The next section is basically the case presenter has the opportunity, again, for 5 minutes to just really reflect on how that process was. What did it feel like? How is it different than other processes that they've gone through? What did they appreciate about it? What did they dislike about it? Where were they uncomfortable? Are they willing to try out any of these action steps? Did some of the interpretations that we made, even though they might have been conflictual, really hit home with them and give them a deeper understanding of the challenge that they're facing? And then the last and final 5 minutes is for the group to just discuss, you know, I showed up in this way, and next time I want to have a louder voice. I didn't talk as much as I want to. I think, or, you know, this time I took up too much airtime, and I'd really like to take up less airtime. Or I know that I asked, when I was supposed to be asking diagnostic questions, I was really asking solution-based questions. So it's a time for the group to just work together to help each other to really improve your practice so that the next time you go in and do peer advising, you're more prepared for it. So this is the basic framework that we're going to be using. I do want to just see what questions you have about this framework before we move into doing a little mock group peer advising. Melissa, I'm not sure if you raised your hand, but if you just use the chat function, just go ahead and chat in your question. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. I'm always open to taking questions all along, so I'm just going to move us into the next section. What type of challenges should we select? Yes, Latoya, I'm going to go and save a little bit of time for that at the end and make sure that we are able to kind of maybe go through a little bit of a few potential challenges people might want to talk about. So I'm just going to save that for the end. Okay. All right, so again, this is just the outline of the 60-minute conference call. Now we're going to do a case example. So this is a mock leadership challenge. This is actually Liz is a fictional character, and based on other case studies that I've worked with through the years with adaptive leadership, I designed this challenge that Liz was having. You'll notice when you go in to get your worksheets that there is a sample worksheet completed for Liz for each of the worksheets to help you guide in that process of how to do this. But just go ahead and take a few minutes to read through this, and we're going to start to make some observations about that. Okay, so just I'll give 4 minutes for us to read through. Okay, I feel like everybody's probably had enough time to read through this, and we're going to move on to the diagnostic questioning phase. So You've just heard Liz present her case. We were going to pretend that she just presented that case to us live. And I want you to remember what I said about staying in this center of being objective questions rather than being out here in problem-solving questions. So if you could please start to chat in some of the questions that are remaining for you as you read through Liz's case example, and really, what would you want to know from her, given that you're going to have to make interpretations and later some interventions from her. So just throw out some diagnostic questions and we'll what are the expectations? It's a great one. You might even want to clarify who the expectations for whom. What are you trying to accomplish? Great. What possible solutions have been discussed? Excellent question. What are the objectives? What's your end goal? What were the staff's expectations? What input? These are all great. So I'm really feeling like everybody's on track with this. Yeah, what are the complaints specifically? What was the job description? Yeah, these are all excellent observational questions. They're not moving into problem solving at all. They're really getting at digging in deeper to the case and getting more information about it. So let's just pretend we got the answers to all those questions, and we're going to move into the next phase, which is the diagnostic brainstorming. So I want you to think about that range from benign to conflictual, and I want you to begin to make some interpretations based on observations that you had from reading her case or from thinking about maybe she answered some of the questions that you all just posted if you had that information. I know it's a little bit funny doing a case study, but try to range from benign to conflictual and think of your interpretations. And I know that this is a little bit more challenging. A possible interpretation that I see is that the lead at the health department does not really support this work, and so is letting the community health education specialist flounder and take all of the flack for not really going through with a public health approach, population-based health approach. Okay, no clear population health strategy in place. Potential lack of communication with everyone in the organization. Staff have not included the community health education specialist. Okay. Doesn't seem they were prepared. Okay. So one thing I would say here is that, yeah, I love this, Amy, that's a great interpretation, so that the community health education specialist being punished with a performance evaluation, although the information seemed to indicate part of the problem or conflict came from the staff's lack of knowledge and understanding of her skills and contributions. That's a really great interpretation, and I would say that this falls somewhere in between benign and conflictual. So Philip, great interpretation. The one thing that I want to remind you to do, and I am going to be especially, but Talia and I will be especially strict on this, the calls about this, is that you say what the observation is that led you to that interpretation. What that does is it diffuses the information a little bit and it tracks it back to a source. So when you just come at someone with a really conflictual interpretation, unless you can if you track it back to the source, the observation, it's much more soothing for them. It feels much safer for them. And again, what we're trying to create is an environment of safety where people can really share deeply and openly in the service of each other's learning. So this is great. Some great interpretations. Now the part that we all are used to really doing a lot of is action step brainstorming. But before we do it, I really want you to remember that what we're trying to do is not solve Liz's problem, but we're trying to have Liz better understand what the problem is. So this is a crucial difference here in the type of interventions that you would propose for her to get more information. So if you track back to Philip's interpretation that the health department has no knowledge of population health, and although they want to move population health forward, they need to begin to start studying how to learn. So an intervention to test if that is true could be to potentially sit down with the health officer or to do a survey with the staff to gain a better understanding of what population health is. Not solving the problem, but it's better understanding if that is what the problem is. Does that make sense to everybody, I hope? So absolutely just start making interventions, make them safe, something that Liz could go home and implement immediately or over the next couple weeks. We want these to be timely, or something risky that might really challenge her, that she'd say, no way, I would never do that. But as she, takes it home and internalizes it, it might really actually be something she's going to do. Okay, great, very safe. Review the job description, very, very safe way to do that. I really encourage everybody to be reading the chat function too. It's how we communicate with each other in these webinars. But yeah, have the leadership team to meet to discuss what population health should look like for that health department. That's a little bit risky, but it's a great opportunity for them to gather more observations and make more interpretations, right? So identify the steps to move towards population health. I think that is a solution to the problem. What I would say is we're not quite sure what the problem is yet, so maybe identifying steps to move towards better understanding how the health department views population health might be a slight alteration, Melissa, that I would make to that intervention, just because, again, we're trying to clarify what exactly the problem is. So educate all staff on the duties of the community health education specialist. A different approach to that, LaToya, might be to interview all of the staff to see what they understand to be the duties of the community health education specialist and why they see her as a threat. Because you're learning more, you're gathering more information from that intervention. Okay. Improve orientation process. So there's a mix here. If we read through these chats, there's a mix of things that are solutions to the problem, which the presenter's going to love those, but we also want to just really keep in our mind that what we're trying to do is help them clarify what their adaptive challenge is so that then they have a better chance of solving it. So it's just a fine distinction, and I think over our 9 weeks together, or 8 weeks of courses, that we're really going to get better and better at this process. So the next piece would be case presenter reflections, and Liz would turn around and she would have some reflections about what was just said, both in the interpretation stage and in the intervention stage. Can you try to think of how Liz might be feeling or thinking, or how some of this information might have landed with her, and kind of jot down some notes in the chat function about what you think that she might say when she was doing her 5 minutes of reflections? Just a few ideas would be great. And Samantha, I appreciate that you stated right up ahead that you were proposing a risky interpretation. I think that that's a really good way to do it, to let them know that, hey, this is something you might not want to do. So she's gathered some options to bring back and test, and maybe didn't realize that the community health education specialist was being blamed for everything. So this is a really valuable piece. What I want you to do if you are the case presenter is just use this time not to correct people where they went on the wrong path, but to really use yourself as information, because the fact is you presented for 5 minutes and then you answered 10 minutes of questions. And if people misunderstood you, it gives you a lot of information about how you present the problem. So if we're misunderstanding you, it's quite possible that others are misunderstanding you. So don't try to correct people during this, but really you can talk about how what you meant to say came out differently, or the different things that you'd like to try when you go. Yeah, I really appreciate these. And then we'll go through a quick debrief, and we'll just use these questions. How well did we avoid problem solving during the observation phase? We won't go through this now, but I just wanted you to see about what kinds of questions we'll be looking at. How well did the group avoid politeness to getting in the way of progress? Politeness is the enemy of growth, and so we really need to all create a safe space for this and really not let politeness get in the way of making the of saying the tough things. And so how well did the group brainstorm action steps that are spanning the risk spectrum will be one thing we always want to look at and see if we're really sticking all to the low risk side. And then what could be done to improve the peer advising sessions in the future. So I'm going to go over very quickly peer advising best practices, and then we'll get a little bit more into talking about what are some potential cases you could bring forward. So you need to be in a quiet, do not disturb place. You should be in a place where you're not going to be overheard by anyone. I work in an open floating office, so if I want to have a phone call, I have to book a conference room. So some of you may be in that situation. You really want to have a phone. You want to be away from your computer. If emails are flying at you, it's really challenging to stay on focus and listen to somebody. So, you know, just try to turn your screen monitor off if you're taking your call in your office. And we're going to want to stick very closely to the timing. Talia and I asked your permission at the very beginning of the call to really allow us to be the timekeepers and to understand that there is, you know, this protocol was developed on years of research at Harvard, and we are sticking with it for a specific reason because it has been proven to work. This is about the challenges. I love this woman pulling her hair out. We want you to bring a live challenge when you are the presenter, something that is making you feel like this woman looks like, I'm right in the midst of it. It's very challenging. So that's the kind of challenge that we want you to bring to the table. We want you to take notes. Not everybody's a note taker. If you are a computer note taker, then certainly use your computer to take notes during this. But to be able to go, I observed X, I interpret Y, and I suggest intervention C, you have to have that written track down because lots of information is going to be flying at you. And this temperature gauge is just a little bit to measure the temperature in the room and not be afraid to turn up the heat. So turning up the heat is the way that we describe, like, if something is just going along and, you know, there's, it's at a medium temperature, there's really no impetus for change to happen. And we'll talk more about that. It's one of the core concepts in adaptive leadership. But you want to pay attention to how you're regulating the heat. Like, are you bringing the heat too high and making someone uncomfortable, or are you keeping it low in hopes of keeping them comfortable? So the sign-up process is simply this. You go to the Adobe sign-up sheet and you sign up for a day and time. I've already seen that many people have gone into that link. You're going to indicate whether you're a presenter or peer advisor, and you'll be randomly assigned to a group of peers. And it's not a NACCHO. NACCHO's not going to be contacting you. Actually, Antonio will be sending out the invitations for the phone calls. So I wanted to just get off my screen really quickly. I wanted to share my screen, and I don't know if I can do that.
Idea. Let me intervene here, and I'll help you out.
Yeah. I have the Google spreadsheet up, and I just wanted to show people.
Okay. Let me make you
the link is in some of the materials, Deidre, and the link is also going to go out with a follow-up email that we're going to send you tomorrow that has the recording for both of these orientation sessions. And it's in the it's also in the peer advising module on the learning.
Okay, so you should be able to share your desktop now, Dea.
So is everybody seeing my screen? So this is the peer advising session sign up, and we will send this link out to you tomorrow, like we said with the email, so you can sign up. If you want to go ahead and sign up now, that's completely fine. Again, because we have a limited, only a a limited number of people that can present, we do ask that you understand it's a first come first served basis. So the first 2 people to put down that they want to be peer presenters are going to be chosen. If someone put it down 4 times in a row, we'll choose them maybe the first time, and then the second time we'll go down and make sure. So no one will be presenting twice, but not everyone. Only about half the group is going to have the opportunity to be presenters on the call. So I just wanted to show this to you so you know what it looks like. You'll just go in and put your name, your email, and then you'll get an email with an invitation to a call from Antonia. So, okay, so here's the sign up slide, and I'm just going to stop here. We can go back to stop showing my screen and go to the slides. So let's talk about challenges. What I want you to do is to bring a challenge that is alive. So you may have made some success on it, but you haven't solved it completely. I want you to bring something in adaptive leadership. We talk about things kind of hitting you in the head and the heart, like above the, it's kind of like above the neck, hitting you above the neck, that kind of intellectual problem. We want something that hits you in the heart and the gut, that every time you go to work at it, you feel this like, why can't I get the progress made on this thing? So something that you're really invested in, and something that you actually can affect change on. So if there is a major thing like employee turnover happening at your organization, if you can't affect change around it, then do not choose that as your challenge. It has to be something that you and members of your team can directly work on together. So it can be so many different things. Over the years, we've had everything from trying to implement a health equity approach across all programmatic areas in a health department. We've had trying to get off the ground quality improvement projects that are not backed by the upper management. We've had difficult staff person with a supervisor who does not allow them to take action on their own. We've had people working with community coalitions where partnerships just keep falling apart and people don't take the actions that they're supposed to do. We've had community health improvement projects. We've had vaccination discussions. We've had a lot has been coming up around opioid use and abuse and strategies around social determinants of health and how difficult it is to really take a social determinants of health approach when people really want to do remediation. So I mean, chat in some ideas that you have. We have 8 minutes and we can kind of talk about them a little bit, get input from your peers, or you can reach out to me directly. If you send elearning@NACCHO.org, I check that email frequently, and so does Talia, or you can reach out to me directly. Next week, your very first order of business is going to be opening up Module 1, and Module 1 will have those two, several different ways for you to learn about what adaptive and technical challenges are. So when you go to do your worksheet, you'll already have attended this live learning session on May 7th. I suggest that you pull out the worksheet and read through the questions. It's really going to help you to understand that every challenge has both technical elements and adaptive elements. And I know I'm using language that I haven't defined yet, so I apologize, but it's going to be explained in the Monday's content that you're going to go through. So when we meet on Tuesday, I'm going to give an overview of the concepts. We're going to talk about them a little bit, and then I'm going to walk through the worksheet step by step and kind of tell you what we're expecting. And my expectation is that everyone turns in their worksheet by Friday and has a pretty good idea, has decided on what their adaptive challenge is. If you want to check in with a peer and say, do you think this sounds like a good adaptive challenge, or do you think this sounds like a good challenge to work on? That would be my suggestion to you. So what questions do you have? You want to go back to the sign-in slide. The sign-in slide is not a slide. Yeah, Philip, I think you understood. Okay, great. So questions coming in? I'm just going to read through this chat. Everybody else should do the same. This is absolutely great, Philip, for a number of reasons. One, it's a great challenge. Cultural change is something that is definitely an adaptive challenge. The second thing is this entire process is confidential. Your worksheets are held confidentially. They are never shown to anyone inside or outside of the organization. For this particular group, when you are assigned to a peer advising group, we would just make sure that you're not assigned with anybody else from either the Grundy or Whiteside County Health Department. So I really do think that's a great thing, and a lot of what we need to do is just develop the trust in each other, because these are confidential conversations. Other than this being recorded right now and being open to the group, the statement that you just made is only open to the group. So you have to do some brainstorming about adaptive challenge, looking forward to the framework. Great. So are there any process questions that you have? I'm hoping that it seems like a lot of people have been able to get online, or have been able to troubleshoot with people. Okay. So the next, again, the next step we have is tomorrow mid-morning you should receive an email from Talia. She's going to send out the recordings of both the session we did today on peer orientation along with the slides. She'll also send out the recording from Tuesday's course orientation webinar and those associated slides. And in the body of the email, she'll give the link for the Google sign-up sheet for peer advising. All of this information is also available on the e-learning platform. So if you want to go back into the e-learning platform and begin to review any of these materials, they're all there for you. And I think with that, I will turn it over to you, Lori, if you have any last minute.
Thanks, Dea. No, I don't have anything else that we need to say. Just if you have any questions or you have any concerns or challenges, let us know. But it seems like everybody had success in being able to get on. And just a reminder that we will only use the webinar platform for the learning modules. The peer advising sessions will just be by phone call only and will not be recorded. Again, I just want to reiterate that. So if you do have any other questions, contact Tony or I.
And a great question just came in from Alexa. So pushing the envelope with conflictual interpretation, I don't think it's exactly similar to constructive criticism, because what you're doing is you are owning the interpretation. I observed this, and based on what I know, I interpret it this way. It's not saying you need to do something differently or you are behaving in this manner. It's saying I saw you roll your eyebrows. Was not great for a phone, but when they're in person, I saw you roll your eyes every single time you mentioned your supervisor's name. I interpret that as you having a level of frustration that you may not have acknowledged about your supervisor. Do you see how that's a little bit different than constructive criticism? I just want to make sure. So it's not instructing them to do something differently or pointing out where they're negatively behavior. You're really owning that it's your experience that's informing interpretation. All right, well, we have 2 minutes. I'll stay on the line just in case any questions come up, and we'll close up right at 2. I'm really excited to work with you all. This is going to be a great session. And I think everybody is always hesitant about peer advising, but in our evaluations year after year, it comes out as the most useful and popular element of the course. Yes, John, it is stepping out of the box. That's we're glad to facilitate that process. There will be stumbling blocks along the way, but we're there to support you. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.